So today we will be discussing about neuroophthalmology. Neuroophthalmology, we will divide it into two parts. First, we will study the normal anatomy of the optic tract or all of the optic system. Okay, and then we will study its lesions. Okay, so first, for studying the optic system, we will begin with directly from the retina, from where the fibers of the optic nerve start till where it is relayed in the brain or the occipital lobe visual cortex. So let's assume this is the retina. Okay, so this is the left side and this is the right side. Then the fibers start from the retina and then they go back. So before starting this, we would like to say that the projections of the object, how is object projected onto the retina. So this is important to know to understand whole of the pathway and then its lesions. Suppose we have an object in front of our eyes. How is this object projected onto the retina? So suppose this is an object. It depends upon, for example, whether it is on the temporal side or on the nasal side. Okay, so if the object is on the nasal side, its image is projected onto the temporal side, and if the object is on the temporal side, its image is projected onto the retina on the nasal side. This we have to keep in our mind, that there is opposite projections. Okay, so if we have an object on the temporal side of our eye, its image will be formed on the nasal side of our retina, and if the object is on the nasal side of our eye, the image will be projected onto the temporal side of the retina. So similarly, all this projection and these impressions will be back into the visual cortex. So whole of the representation will be like this. Now you will be asking, why is it so? Why the nasal object or the object on the nasal side does not have its projection on the nasal side, or vice versa? This is because the light travels in the straight direction. So if we have an object on the nasal side, now the light rays that are emitting on from this object will be directly hitting the temporal side of the retina, and that of the temporal side of the object, the temporal object, if the object is on the temporal side, the light will travel in the straight line and will project, these will directly hit the nasal side of our retina, and thus image is formed accordingly. So the nerve fibers that arise from these or the axons of the neurons on the retina, they will together meet and form the optic nerve together. Okay, so this optic nerve will come out through the lamina cribrosa, that is sieve like perforations in the sclera on posteriorly, and will come out. They will come out as a nerve called as the optic nerve. Okay, this is called as the optic nerve. Now when it travels back, a point will come, or it reaches a point where the nasal fibers, okay, the nasal fiber from the right and the left eye, they will cross. So they will cross each other to the opposite side, while as the fibers on the temporal side will not cross, and they will. So we have seen a lot of positions in our body, there are decussations. So similarly is here, the nasal fibers will decussate, while as the temporal fibers will not decussate. So the optic nerve thus contains the nasal side and the temporal side of the same eye, similarly on the left side and the right side, while as after the decussation it doesn't remain the same. After the decussation, there is the temporal fibers of the same side plus the nasal fibers of the contralateral side. So we have, after decussation, we have ipsilateral temporal plus contralateral nasal. Okay, so the point of decussation here, the point at which they decussate, is called as the optic chiasm. Okay, now after the decussation, the tract that is formed is called as the optic tract. Okay, so the optic nerve will have ipsilateral nasal and ipsilateral temporal. Then at the optic chiasm there is decussation of only the nasal fibers, and after decussation there is formation of the optic tract which will have the ipsilateral temporal plus the contralateral nasal fibers. Now this optic fibers traverse the optic tract and they will reach lateral geniculate bodies. Okay, so at the lateral geniculate bodies, these are all the first order neurons right from the retina, okay, from until the lateral geniculate body. Here they will relay and new fibers will come out, that is second order fibers. They will come out and will form the optic radiation. Okay, these optic radiations come or out of the lateral geniculate body in the form of two radiations, optic superior optic radiation and inferior optic radiation. These together will form the optic radiation proper, and this optic radiation will go to the brain, that is the visual cortex. Okay, so this whole is called as the optic radiation. This one part which forms the inferior optic radiation, and why do they come and what is the importance of this, we will be studying it further. And this is whole is called as the oral optic pathway. So here we will see the superior optic radiation, inferior optic radiation. The importance is this: they traverse through the different lobes of the brain to reach the visual cortex. The superior optic radiation will traverse through the parietal lobe of the brain to reach the visual cortex, that is the occipital lobe, and the inferior optic radiation will pass through the temporal lobe. So accordingly, depending upon sometimes there may be lesion in the parietal lobe and thus only superior optic radiation will be involved, or sometimes there may be temporal lobe lesion and thus inferior optic radiation will be involved, and accordingly we will have manifestations in the visual field. The superior optic radiations which travel through the parietal lobe, this is called as the Baum's loop. Okay, BAUMS, Baum's loop. This which traverses through the temporal lobe is called as a Meier's loop. So these are names that is given to them, and accordingly lesions are given the name. Also, we will have the inferior fibers through this and superior fibers through this. So accordingly on the visual field, since we have seen there is opposite projection, superior in if there is superior, then the lesion will show on the inferior side, and here we have inferior loop, and thus the lesion will show on the superior side, which we will study consequently when we will study the lesions. Another point to be noted here on the this whole pathway is that the nasal fibers which will come out of the retina, they will come out in two parts. They will come out in the form of superior nasal fibers and inferior nasal fibers. Okay, so what is the importance of this superior nasal fiber and inferior nasal fiber? When they will reach the optic chiasm, both will cross. The superior nasal fiber will also cross and inferior nasal fiber will also cross. But this inferior nasal fiber will, when it will cross, it will give a loop like turn like this at the optic chiasm, such that some part of the loop will reach the optic nerve itself. Okay, so thus the part of the inferior nasal fibers, when they will form a loop or knee-like loop, it will just project onto the optic nerve of the opposite side. For example, here on the right side, the right inferior nasal fibers, when they will cross, they will loop into the left optic nerve, and vice versa for the right side. The importance of this is that sometimes there are lesions in the optic nerve just near this optic chiasm, so it may involve not only the temporal and nasal fibers of its own side, but also the inferior nasal fibers of the opposite side, giving a different lesion from if the lesion is here, for example, above the optic chiasm, where only the temporal and the nasal fibers of the optic nerve will be involved. So this will give a different picture clinically from this and this, and thus it will help us in localization of the lesion, and also there will be difference in the manifestations. So this is all about the optic system, and also importantly through this optic pathway, not only does the fibers from the retina reach or traverse through the optic pathway, there are also the fibers which take impulses from the sphincter pupillae. Okay, so or that is impulses from the pupil. These fibers, when they traverse through the optic nerve, they will traverse similarly as that of the optic nerve, but the thing is that it will not cross. And another fact is that these fibers will come out of the optic nerve. Okay, these fibers will come out of the optic nerve before this optic tract goes into the lateral geniculate body. Okay, so these fibers will then go to their own relay stations, which is in the midbrain. We have pretectal nuclei, which we will study consequently in the topic of pupil. So why is this important to study here is that if usually we know the fibers here are temporal, ipsilateral, temporal and contralateral nasal. Similarly we will have it here also, we will have it here also. So the symptoms may be same, but this fibers from the pupil will help us to differentiate the optic tract lesions from the other lesions, because here if there is a lesion here there will be involvement of sphincter pupillae also, or there will be changes in the pupil, abnormalities in the pupil, while it will not be here if there is a lesion in the lateral geniculate body or optic radiation. Hopefully this is of some help to you. We will continue this next in next video, which will be regarding the lesions of the optic system. So this was all about the anatomy. Hope you find it useful. Do share, like and subscribe it. Thank you.